Welcome, romance lovers. Prepare to be pulled into a world where modern medicine clashes with ancient, primal magic. Dr. Avery Kincaid ran from a mistake that cost a life, seeking refuge in the quiet corners of the Pacific Northwest. But the simple, safe life she craved is shattered when the very thing she swore didn't exist. A magnificent, wounded alpha werewolf named Rhys Darian stumbles into her clinic. Now, her healing hands are the only things standing between a man and a deadly, magical curse. She saved the beast, and now he's claiming the healer. You're about to dive into a story of impossible truths, desperate survival, and a connection forged in fire. If you're ready for the shadows, the magic, and the undeniable pull between the healer and the beast, then grab your blanket, turn out the lights, and let's begin. But first, if you're not already part of the pack, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single chapter of their epic, dangerous journey. Enjoy the story. The silence wasn't a balm. It was the crushing weight of a failure too monumental to comprehend, an absolute vacuum where life had been a moment before. My hands, which medical school had assured me were the finest instruments of restoration, now shook with a raw, ugly tremor as I stared at the man on the operating table. Dr. Vance, my mentor and the closest thing I had to family, was motionless, his skin a terrifying shade of ash. The monitor beside him declared the final, brutal truth. A flat line, unwavering, a monument to my defeat. Time of death, 1:45 a.m., a technician whispered, her voice barely a breath. But the formal declaration was irrelevant. The cold finality was already etched in the room's atmosphere. My vision swam, not from sorrow, though the sting of tears was there, but from the searing, visceral rage, directed entirely at myself. He was gone because of my arrogance. Because of the reckless, blinding conviction that I, Dr. Avery Kincaid, could rewrite the rules of biology, that I held the key to universal cure. Just this morning, he'd been vibrant, regaling the team with his grand plans to finally climb Mount Kilimanjaro, joking that I possessed the most miraculous touch in the entire hospital, the only one who could manage his practice in his absence. Now, that touch was a memory, and his skin was cold, irrevocably cold. Dr. Chen, his usual crisp voice softened to an unfamiliar gentleness, approached me. "We need your signature on the death certificate, Avery." He was a stickler for process, yet even his posture showed the profound shock. My arm felt like lead, the pen hovering uselessly. How could I sign? How could I affix my name to the document that made my disastrous error permanent? He had been hale, robust, exposed only to the experimental serum. The one I had promised was the future of regenerative medicine, the one designed to conquer death, not deliver it. A wave of gut-wrenching nausea hit me, and the antiseptic smell of the sterile environment, once the scent of purpose, now reeked only of my spectacular collapse. The walls, the comforting boundaries of my professional sanctuary, seemed to press inward, suffocating me. I can't, I choked out, pushing the clipboard away. My voice was a dry, rasping whisper, eclipsed by the desperate, frantic drumming of my own heart against my ribs, a trapped thing demanding release. Dr. Chen sighed, a sound heavy with a mixture of pity and exasperation. "Avery, protocol is protocol. Protocol." The word was a vicious mockery. What about the protocol for undoing a catastrophe? What about the procedure to erase the image of his kind, trusting eyes when I had asked him to volunteer? I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to banish the memory, but it was scorched onto the inside of my eyelids. The excited nod, the hearty "go for it, kid, you'll redefine healing." Instead, I had ended him. A cold, existential dread began to permeate my bones, the inevitable lawsuits, the inquiries, the public disgrace. My career, my carefully constructed reputation, my entire future, all collapsing into a heap of ash. But worse than all that, infinitely worse, was the unshakable knowledge of my responsibility. My ambition, my desperate, consuming need for validation, had extinguished a good man's life. I need to leave, I muttered, shoving past Dr. Chen, ignoring his quiet protests. I tore off the scrubs. The fabric felt like a constraint. I needed air, space, escape from the crushing weight of my irreversible mistake. I stumbled out of the hospital doors, and the brutal night air struck my face like a physical blow. It was frigid, biting, but I registered nothing but the corrosive guilt, the icy clutch of despair. The distant city lights blurred through the tears I wouldn't let fall, each beacon a stark reminder of the millions of lives continuing, utterly oblivious to the tragedy I had unleashed. I had no destination, only the primal need to flee. Run from the accusations, run from the ghosts, run from the doctor I was and the monster I had created. My lifelong dream of being a savior had become a nightmare of destruction. I had to vanish, to disappear, to find a corner of the world where my past couldn't track me, where I couldn't inflict harm on anyone else ever again. As I drove, the glittering metropolis fading rapidly behind me, a low, drawn-out howl drifted through the window. It was a mournful, haunting cry that seemed to perfectly echo the torment in my soul. I shivered, a chill unrelated to the cold air. It felt like a warning, or perhaps a morbid welcome. I was entirely oblivious then that I was speeding headlong into a completely different kind of nightmare, one I was destined to confront. A world where the monsters weren't metaphors, but very, very real. I just knew I had to drive and keep driving until I was nothing more than a ghost, a mere echo of the healer I once was and hoped never to be again. Chapter 1. The move to the Pacific Northwest, to Portland, was my carefully orchestrated vanishing act. A fresh start. A city cloaked in perpetual rain, where the constant dampness might, perhaps, cleanse the indelible stain of my past. I selected a tiny, independently owned medical practice, miles away from the sprawling, hyper-competitive world of research hospitals and their deadly, cutting-edge experiments. Here, life was routine, stitching minor lacerations, dispensing flu vaccines, and reassuring anxious parents about common pediatric illnesses. Simple, uncomplicated, safe. My new apartment was a small, cozy space situated above a beloved local bakery. The comforting, homey scent of yeast and cinnamon perpetually wafted upstairs, serving as a warm counterpoint to the persistent anxiety that chilled me. My days were spent in the meticulous structuring of my new existence, unpacking boxes of outdated medical texts and a few treasured framed photographs, mostly of my parents. Their warm smiles now a bittersweet reminder of a time before my life imploded. I even purchased a new set of scrubs, a serene, hopeful lavender shade, desperately trying to embody the calmer, anonymous Avery. But the old scars were indelible. Every unfamiliar phone call after dark made my heart leap with panic. Every sharp knock on the door sent a jolt of terror through me. I lived perpetually haunted by the memory of Dr. Vance's still, pale face, his kind eyes now accusing me. The terror of recognition, the fear of my past catching up, was a low, constant vibration beneath the fragile surface of my reconstructed peace. My initial weeks at Cedar Grove General Practice were blessedly quiet, exactly what my fractured psyche required. Dr. Stern, the clinic's proprietor, was a silver-haired, gentle man with a permanently weary but kind disposition. He'd recently lost his wife and seemed to appreciate the quiet, competent company. He gave me ample independence, trusting my diagnostic judgment, a trust I desperately craved but also deeply feared. Trust, I had learned, was the most perilous thing of all. One overcast autumn afternoon, a new patient arrived. Not the usual seasonal cold, but a man who seemed to drag the storm clouds in with him. He was extraordinarily tall, incredibly broad across the shoulders, with thick, dark hair that brushed an intense, almost obsidian set of eyes. His intake form named him Rhys Darian. He moved with a barely perceptible limp, favoring his right side, and his gaze possessed a guarded, almost feral quality. He looked entirely out of place, a creature of the deep forest inexplicably seated in a brightly lit doctor's waiting room. "Dr. Kincaid is ready for you now, Mr. Darian," chirped Clara, my receptionist, cheerfully oblivious to the sudden, palpable shift in the room's atmosphere. Clara was a delightful woman, constantly humming folk tunes, completely unflappable. She often attempted to arrange a date between me and her very nice, but very bland nephew, an invitation I always politely but firmly declined. Romance, like ambition, was permanently retired. Rhys Darian stepped into my office, and the air immediately thickened, charged with an invisible, latent energy. He moved with a quiet, coiled power, like a large, dangerous predator. His clothing, simple, dark canvas trousers and a thick charcoal sweater, did little to conceal the impressive, hard physique beneath. A faint, earthy odor clung to him, a blend of pine resin, damp moss, and something else, something distinctly wild. "Mr. Darian," I began, my voice deliberately calm, professional, forcing down the sudden, instinctive tremor in my chest. This wasn't exactly fear, but rather an acute, almost primal awareness of something formidable, something fundamentally different. "What brings you to the clinic today?" He took the chair opposite my desk, filling the space entirely. His eyes, though dark, contained a sudden flash of something unreadable, something ancient and deeply wary. He didn't answer right away, instead studying me with an unnervingly direct gaze. It felt as though he was seeing right through my carefully constructed facade, straight into the raw, pulsating nerve of my guilt. "Pain," he finally rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly sound that seemed to vibrate the room's very foundation. "My leg." "I see," I said, picking up my pen, determined to appear unfazed. "Can you specify the pain? When did it begin? Have you sustained any recent injuries?" He hesitated, then offered a clipped, frustratingly vague account of a misstep while hiking in the wilderness a few weeks ago. His responses were curt, evasive, and failed to adequately explain the apparent severity and persistence of the injury. When I requested to see the wound, he reluctantly pulled up the hem of his trouser leg. What I observed made my breath catch in my throat. There was a deep, viciously jagged scar, partially healed but still angrily inflamed, running from just above his ankle almost to his knee. It appeared as though something had been torn through flesh and muscle, not just a simple cut. Surrounding the scar, the skin was discolored, a sickly, strange yellowish green, with veins that pulsed in an unnatural rhythm. It looked severely infected, deeply so, but it also looked wrong, unlike any bacterial infection I had ever encountered. "Mr. Darian, this is far from a simple misstep," I stated, my professional detachment momentarily dissolving. My diagnostic mind, the part that was the healer, was already racing, attempting to categorize, to diagnose, to formulate a treatment plan. But another deeper, more visceral part was screaming a single word: alien. "It's worsening," he growled, a sound more animalistic than human. "The pain is a constant fire." I reached for my latex gloves, my mind cycling through every possibility. Necrotizing fasciitis, a severe animal attack bite, perhaps a venomous spider. Yet none of those fully accounted for the bizarre discoloration or the faint, almost metallic aroma that now emanated from the wound. As I gently palpated the area, the muscles beneath my fingertips felt unnaturally dense, practically rock-hard. He flinched, and a low, guttural sound escaped his chest. It wasn't explicitly aggressive, but it was a clear warning, a powerful, rumbling sound that caused the hairs on my arms to stand on end. "I need to perform a thorough cleansing and debridement of this wound, and we must start you on broad-spectrum antibiotics. Immediately," I said, my voice firm despite the apprehension twisting in my gut. "I also require a complete set of blood work to check for systemic infection and possibly X-rays to assess for bone trauma." He pulled his leg back abruptly, his dark eyes fixed intensely on mine. "No hospital, no X-rays, no needles, just fix it." His tone was an unequivocal demand, not a request. My jaw tightened. Mr. Darian, I cannot simply fix what I do not fully comprehend. This wound is critical. It could lead to sepsis, potentially prove fatal if not correctly diagnosed and treated. I require information and compliance to help you. He leaned closer, his gaze intensifying, making me feel like a small, exposed thing caught under the scrutiny of a hawk. "You're the healer, aren't you?" he rumbled. "I heard the whispers about your hands." My heart pounded against my ribs. My hands, the miraculous touch. The cruel irony of that old phrase now felt like a brand of shame. How could he possibly know? Had my past tracked me down already? "My reputation precedes me, I suppose," I said, attempting nonchalance, but my voice was unsteady. "I am a medical doctor. I adhere strictly to established medical procedures." "Procedures won't touch this," he countered, his voice dropping to an even lower register, nearly a whisper, yet its resonance filled the office. "This is a different kind of injury." He paused, then looked at me with an intensity that made me instinctively recoil slightly in my seat. "They said you were the one, that you could perceive what others missed, that you could heal the impossible." His words sent a profound shiver down my spine. Who were they? And what did he mean, heal the impossible? My experimental serum, the one that had killed Dr. Vance, had been my attempt at the impossible, and it had resulted in catastrophic failure. "I'm simply a doctor, Mr. Darian," I insisted, my voice firmer now, trying desperately to push back the creeping, irrational dread. "And I cannot treat you if you refuse standard medical practices." He let out a long, slow exhalation, a sound surprisingly human, yet still underscored by that deep, wild undertone. His shoulders slumped, and for a fleeting moment the fierce intensity in his eyes lessened, revealing a flash of raw, ancient pain, a look of profound suffering. It was a look that immediately targeted and tugged at the deepest, most primal part of my healer's heart, the part that still, despite everything, burned with the need to alleviate agony. "Very well," he rasped. "Do what you must, but no hospital, promise me." I hesitated. 1,000 ethical alarm bells were blaring in my head. This was irregular. This was reckless. This had the potential to pull me directly back into the exact kind of complicated, dangerous medicine I had sworn off forever. But the suffering in his eyes was undeniable, desperate. And beneath the raw power, there was an unmistakable, fragile vulnerability. "I cannot promise no hospital if your condition becomes life-threatening, Mr. Darian," I replied, forcing a semblance of professional boundary. "But I will commit to doing my absolute best to treat you here in the clinic with the resources available to me." He gave a single, decisive nod. "Good." He held my gaze for another prolonged moment, and I felt a strange, inexplicable pull, a connection that defied logic. It felt as if something ancient in him recognized something equally ancient within me. Or perhaps it was just the sheer intensity of his stare, the desperate hope in his obsidian eyes. As I began to prepare a sterile field for the necessary cleaning and debridement, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor passed through his body. A low growl, like the distant rumbling of thunder, escaped his chest. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, charged with an invisible, unseen energy. The wild, earthy scent around him intensified, becoming more pronounced. My eyes instinctively darted to the clock on the wall. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting elongated, eerie shadows across my office. And as the last vestiges of daylight disappeared, I noticed something else about Rhys Darian's wound. The edges, which had been inflamed and red, now seemed to pulse very faintly with a strange, dark luminescence. My rational mind struggled to reconcile what I was observing with anything I had ever been taught in medical school. This was not merely an infection. This was something entirely different, something impossible. And a cold, terrifying thought began to bloom in my mind, overshadowing even the lingering, corrosive guilt of my past. I was no longer merely running from my mistakes. I was running headlong into a completely new kind of unknown, one that felt infinitely more dangerous, more primal than anything I could have possibly imagined. I was about to step into a world I had refused to believe existed. A world where the monsters were not metaphors, and the healing required more than just conventional medicine. Chapter 2. The subsequent hours were a concentrated, desperate blur of effort. As twilight deepened, and the moon, a sliver of silver, rose into the sky, Elia's condition deteriorated with an alarming speed that defied every known medical principle. The strange, internal pulsing within his wound grew more pronounced, a sickening, irregular rhythm that seemed to perfectly mimic the frantic, terrified beat of my own heart. The dark discoloration continued to spread, a bruised, angry web of veins creeping inexorably up his leg. He was in absolute agony, his face contorted, a low, constant guttural roar vibrating in his throat. I worked methodically, my hands flying over his leg, a thin film of anxious sweat beading on my brow. I had already painstakingly cleaned and debrided the wound, a gruesome task that revealed lacerated edges and what appeared to be shredded muscle tissue. The bleeding had stopped almost as soon as it had started, only to be replaced by that profoundly unsettling dark internal glow. I had administered a potent, broad-spectrum IV antibiotic, but it seemed to have absolutely zero effect. His temperature was spiking uncontrollably, a fever that burned so intensely I could feel the heat radiating off his skin as I worked. "Mr. Darian, you must tell me what happened," I said, my voice sharp with mounting concern. "This is not a normal wound. My medical options are rapidly running out." He simply shook his head, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles in his face twitching involuntarily. The low growl had intensified into a profound, rattling roar, a sound that seemed to originate from the deepest part of his chest, a sound that was more wolf than man. He was fighting something unseen, struggling, his powerful body convulsing. I had to physically restrain him to prevent him from violently ripping the IV line from his arm. "Easy, Rhys. You have to calm down," I urged, my voice softer now, more pleading. A surge of pure, primal terror completely foreign to me washed over my professional resolve. This wasn't like any patient I had ever encountered. This was beyond a medical case. This was something else entirely. My entire medical training screamed at me to immediately call for an emergency team, to admit him to a major hospital. But his desperate, echoing plea, "No hospital," reverberated in my memory. I was completely trapped between my professional duty and a strange, gut-wrenching conviction that I was now the only person in the world who could help him. The full moon was now completely high in the night sky, its brilliant, silvery light streaming through the large window in my office, bathing the room in a cold, ethereal glow. As the moonlight fully touched his face, a sudden, profoundly violent spasm racked his entire body. He cried out, a sound of such piercing, unbearable agony that it momentarily stole the air from my lungs. His bones, beneath the thick mantle of muscle, seemed to shift, to grind, to break and reform with a sickening, audible crunch that I could distinctly hear over his tortured cries. I scrambled backward, tripping over a supply cart, my eyes wide with a profound terror and absolute disbelief. His body was visibly changing. His knuckles grew thick and gnarled, his fingers lengthening rapidly. Coarse, dark fur began to sprout from his skin, crawling up his arms and over his torso, growing with impossible supernatural speed. His jaw elongated, his teeth sharpened into terrifying fangs. The face of Rhys Darian, the man who had walked into my quiet clinic just hours before, was melting, twisting, and violently reforming into something utterly monstrous. The man was irreversibly transforming into a beast, a werewolf. All the old lore, the dismissed fairy tales, the fantastical myths, came crashing down on me with the devastating force of a tidal wave. My rational mind, the logical, scientific part of me, reeled. This is impossible. This cannot be happening. And yet, it was right there, directly in front of me. The uncontrolled fever, the unbearable pain, the bizarre wound, the powerful, wild scent. It all now made a terrifying, utterly impossible kind of sense. He collapsed heavily onto the examination table, no longer a man, but a gigantic, immensely powerful wolf. He was still profoundly injured, the wound on his leg glowing with that same eerie light. He whimpered, a low, pained sound that was half wolf, half man. And it was that sound, the unmistakable echo of Rhys's suffering, that shock pulled me back to my senses. He was still in there. The man was still completely trapped inside the beast. My fear, though still intensely present, was instantly eclipsed by a powerful, surging wave of my professional, primal instinct. He was dying. The violent transformation had been too much for his already compromised body. I couldn't abandon him, not now. Not when he was so utterly helpless. I was a healer. It was my core identity. I had to try to save him, even if it meant risking my own life entirely. I cautiously approached the table, my hands visibly trembling. The massive beast watched me, his dark, intelligent eyes tracking my every subtle movement. They were no longer wild and feral. They were filled with a pained, knowing gaze. He trusted me, or at least the trapped man inside him did. "Rhys," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The beast whined a low, deeply mournful sound and nudged my hand with his massive, furred head, a gesture of desperate, silent plea. I took a deep, steadying breath, forcefully pushing down the fear. This was my new nightmare, infinitely more dangerous than the one I had run from, but also infinitely more compelling. I couldn't run from this, not when a life, an impossible life, was on the line. I had to face this beast, this impossible patient, and find a way to heal him. I returned to the supply cart, my mind now racing with an entirely different kind of calculation. Regular medicine had failed. The curse was too potent. What would work? I suddenly recalled something I had once read, an obscure, fantastical passage in an old, leather-bound volume my grandfather, a dedicated cryptobotanist, used to possess. It spoke of an incredibly rare, medicinal herb, rumored to grow only in places touched by the Fae. It was used in old-world remedies to treat ailments of a purely magical nature. The herb was called moon petal. It sounded like something ripped straight from a fantasy novel, but I was living a fantasy novel now. I grabbed my phone, my fingers flying as I frantically searched for any corroborating information on the herb. My search yielded nothing concrete, but I did manage to locate an old botanical record describing a specific species of flower native to the Olympic Peninsula with a distinct silver luminescence that was said to possess potent healing properties. The description was an eerie match. It was a long shot, a near impossibility, but it was the only option I had left. It was my only chance to save the beast on my table. I grabbed my car keys, a feeling of grim, absolute determination settling over me. I had to find this plant, and I had to do it immediately. The beast's labored, rattling breathing was a constant, terrifying reminder of the rapidly ticking clock. As I reached for the door, a low, potent growl from the table stopped me instantly. The beast struggled weakly to get up, its gaze locked on the outside world, a deep, primal fear evident in its eyes. "I'll be back," I whispered, my hand resting on the doorknob. He let out another pained whine, and I saw a sudden flash of something purely human in his eyes. It was a plea, a silent, desperate message that begged me not to leave him. He was terrified, afraid to be alone, afraid to be the monster he had become. I couldn't abandon him, but I absolutely couldn't risk him being discovered by anyone else. With a heavy heart, I shut the door firmly, locking it from the outside. I had to go alone. I was the only one who could successfully complete this impossible task. My entire life, all my failures and all my mistakes, had led me inexorably to this moment. The curse I had run from had delivered me straight into another, infinitely more powerful and terrifyingly real one. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this time I wouldn't run away. I was a healer, and this beast needed me to survive. Chapter 3. The drive toward the Olympic Peninsula was a true fever dream. The winding, treacherous roads, slick with rain, seemed to mock my desperate speed. My car's headlights cut twin beams through the inky, overwhelming darkness, illuminating a world that felt both superficially familiar and fundamentally alien. This was not the modern city I knew. This was something wilder, vastly older. A land where ancient, powerful secrets lay hidden beneath the colossal canopy of towering pines and the constant, weeping mist. My only tenuous guides were a vague memory of my grandfather's cryptic notes and a few faded, hand-drawn maps I had found tucked away in an old, leather-bound volume I had instinctively grabbed from my apartment. He had been fanatically obsessed with cryptobotany, the study of mythical and extremely rare plants, and I had always dismissed it as charming eccentricity. Now, it was my absolute last hope. The map guided me deep into the heart of the Hoh rainforest, a place so dense and ancient it felt like walking into a living, breathing cathedral. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of wet, decaying earth and moss. The silence was profound, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain on the car roof and the frantic, chaotic beat of my own heart. I finally reached a section of the logging road that the map clearly marked as impassable. I had no choice but to immediately abandon the car and continue the journey on foot. Grabbing my emergency flashlight and a small trowel from my glove compartment, I plunged into the dense forest. The beam of my flashlight felt laughably small against the vast, impenetrable darkness. Twisted roots, like gnarled, aggressive fists, snaked across the forest floor, and I stumbled repeatedly. The biting cold seeped into my bones, but the potent adrenaline coursing through my veins prevented me from feeling it fully. All I could focus on was the monster I had left behind, the man imprisoned inside a powerful beast, his life hanging precariously in my hands. According to my grandfather's handwritten notes, the moon petal was a plant of immense, almost celestial power, said to be drawn to places of profound suffering and equally profound healing. It was rumored to bloom only under the light of a new or full moon, and to glow with a soft, silvery light. I was essentially searching for a ghost of a plant, a mythical object in a forest that felt as though it was torn straight from a terrifying Grimm's fairy tale. Hours bled into a timeless purgatory of desperate searching. My muscles ached relentlessly. My clothes were completely soaked through, and a cold, insidious dread was beginning to set in. The forest, which had once felt like a place of quiet, primal beauty, now felt hostile, full of unseen, watchful eyes and rustling, ambiguous shadows. I was on the absolute brink of giving up, of admitting defeat and turning back, when a faint, ethereal glow caught my eye. It was a soft, pale luminescence originating from a small clearing slightly ahead of me. My heart immediately leaped into my throat. Dropping to my knees, I crawled forward, pushing aside wet ferns and tangled undergrowth. And there it was, not a single plant, but a small cluster, a beautiful constellation of flowers glowing with a soft, otherworldly light. They were a delicate, translucent silver. Each petal was perfectly shaped like a tiny crescent moon. They pulsed with a gentle, slow rhythm, almost as if they were softly breathing. They were impossibly beautiful, and they were unequivocally real. A wave of pure relief, so powerful it made my knees weak, washed over me. I had found it, the moon petal. I carefully began to dig around the largest plant, my hands trembling with a mixture of utter exhaustion and wild exhilaration. As my fingers brushed the cold soil, the ground immediately beneath me felt strangely warm, a stark contrast to the biting cold of the night air. The plant seemed to offer a faint resistance, its roots deeply tangled with the very fabric of the earth, as if it absolutely refused to be taken. "Please," I whispered, my voice raw with the desperation of my mission. "He needs this. A man's life depends on it." Whether the plant actually heard my plea or if it was merely a strange coincidence, I couldn't possibly know. But as I voiced my desperation, it seemed to finally surrender. The roots came free with a gentle, soft pop, and the plant came easily into my hands. It felt impossibly light, almost like holding captured starlight. The glowing pulsed more intensely now, as if sensing its imminent vital purpose. Clutching the moon petal tightly, I raced back through the forest toward the car. The journey back was a complete blur. The adrenaline from finally locating the plant and the extreme urgency to return to Rhys propelled me forward relentlessly. I was oblivious to the ceaseless rain, or the thick mud, or the sheer, cosmic impossibility of what I was doing. I was a doctor, and I had a patient in profoundly critical condition. That was the only reality that mattered now. When I finally burst through the doors of the clinic, the sight that greeted me was even more harrowing than my panicked imagination had conjured. The massive wolf was now curled into a tight, defensive ball on the examination table. Its ragged, shallow breaths a low, frightening rattling sound in the quiet room. The strange, dark luminescence had spread from its leg to its entire body, now pulsing with a faint, sickly glow. It was visibly growing weaker, the powerful muscles of its huge body trembling uncontrollably with absolute exhaustion. I rushed to the sink, my hands flying. I knew I needed to crush the petals and create a medicinal poultice, but I also knew I had to be extremely careful. My grandfather's obscure notes had explicitly warned that the moon petal was incredibly sensitive to outside energy. It would only fully work for those who were pure of heart and intent. I had spent so long running from my past, from my monumental guilt, that I wasn't at all certain I was truly worthy of its power. "Please let this work," I mumbled, my hands fumbling clumsily with the tiny, glowing petals. As I crushed them, they released a faint, intensely sweet scent, like honeysuckle mixed with rainwater, that immediately flooded the sterile room. I mixed the resulting paste with a small amount of sterile water and a few drops of my own blood, just as my grandfather's notes had advised. A small, necessary sacrifice to the earth. Approaching the beast, I was no longer afraid. My fear had been utterly replaced by a quiet, fierce, determined focus. The wolf watched me, its dark eyes still filled with an underlying human intelligence and a deep, abiding pain. It whimpered softly as I knelt beside it, a low, pleading sound. "I'm here, Rhys," I whispered, placing a gentle hand on his massive, furred head. "I'm going to help you," with infinite, painstaking care. I began to spread the glowing paste over the monstrous wound on his leg. As soon as the very first bit of the poultice touched his skin, a blinding flash of light erupted from the wound, followed by a low, rumbling groan. The beast's entire body spasmed violently, but this time, the reaction was distinct. This time, it wasn't a convulsion of pain, but a profound, powerful release. The sickening dark glow began immediately to recede, fading like smoke being drawn away. The dark, bruised veins visibly returned to their normal, healthy color. The gnarled, broken muscle began to knit back together with a sickening, audible sound, the skin reforming over it with a smooth, almost unnatural healing grace. He was still undeniably a monster, but the life-threatening sickness was gone. He was still the beast, but the man trapped inside was no longer dying. As I finished applying the last of the poultice, the wolf's body began to shimmer, its monstrous form wavering, melting, shrinking rapidly. The fur receded completely, the muscles softened, the bones audibly shifting back into their human configuration. The terrifying, monstrous visage of the wolf was replaced by the exhausted but unharmed face of Rhys Darian. He lay there completely naked and unconscious on my examination table. The wound on his leg, just hours before a gruesome, gaping, infected mess, was now nothing more than a faint, thin, silvery scar. The moon petal had not simply healed him. It had completely erased the curse, or at least this potentially deadly round of its effects. I gently wrapped him in a warm blanket, my hands still trembling from the cold and the sheer, overwhelming surrealism of the night. My gaze settled on his face, utterly peaceful in sleep. He had trusted me implicitly. He had placed his life directly in my hands, and somehow, by a miracle born of ancient folklore and desperation, I had saved him. My own past, the haunting guilt of Dr. Vance's death, felt a world away, a distant, muffled echo. This felt like real healing. This was raw, impossible magic. I had just saved a man from a curse, not a disease. My hands, once symbols of my overwhelming hubris and catastrophic failure, had become an actual conduit for something more profound than I could have ever imagined. And as I watched the soft, even rise and fall of his chest, I knew with a chilling certainty that my life was no longer my own. I was irrevocably tied to this man, this beast, and the impossible world he had violently pulled me into. And I knew, with a bone-deep conviction that settled heavily in my soul, that I wouldn't be running anymore. This was a new start, and this time, the scars I carried were not a mark of failure, but of a different, infinitely more dangerous kind of purpose. Chapter 4. I woke with a sudden, sharp jolt, my head resting awkwardly on my arms at the side of the examination table. The morning light, pale and watery, filtered weakly through the blinds. For a fleeting moment, I dared to think it had all been nothing more than a nightmare, a fever dream born of exhaustion and profound guilt. Then I looked at the man lying peacefully on the table. He was still there, securely wrapped in the blanket, his chest rising and falling in a slow, steady, reassuring rhythm. The man lived. The beast was gone. The only remaining physical evidence of the night's impossible events was the faint, thin, silvery scar on his leg. As I watched, his eyes fluttered open slowly. They were no longer the dark, intense eyes of a wild, tormented creature, but the warm, deep mahogany eyes of a man, filled with a drowsy confusion. He looked slowly around the room, his gaze finally settling on me. A faint, almost sheepish smile touched his lips. "You're still here?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, the sound less of a threat and more of a quiet, profound question. "Where else would I be?" I replied, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep and the brutal emotional roller coaster of the night. He sat up slowly, the blanket slipping easily from his shoulders. His body was a magnificent structure, lean and powerfully muscled, a testament to the sheer, raw power of the beast I had just healed. He appeared to be without a single scratch, a minor miracle in itself. He looked down at the scar on his leg, a thin silver line that caught the faint morning light. He gently touched it, his expression unreadable. "The moon petal," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "You actually found it." "I did," I confirmed, and a flicker of my old professional self instantly returned. "Mr. Darian, we need to have a serious conversation. What exactly happened last night? What is the nature of this curse?" He sighed a long, weary sound and looked at me with an expression of profound, bone-deep exhaustion. "My name is Rhys Darian, and I am the alpha of the Black River Pack." He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, as if he were merely telling me his occupation was a landscape architect. My brain, despite every single impossible thing I had just witnessed, still struggled violently to process it. An alpha, a werewolf, a pack. It sounded exactly like something ripped straight from a dark fantasy novel. "A pack," I repeated, my voice tight with disbelief. He nodded slowly. "We are wolves. We are a small community, a deeply hidden one. We live among you, but we are fundamentally not like you." He gestured toward his healed leg. "This curse, it was specifically designed to kill me." Not a typical challenge, but one of a magical nature. A slow-acting poison meant to weaken me and render me completely unable to lead my pack. "Who inflicted this?" I demanded, a sudden, powerful surge of protective anger rising in my chest. I couldn't rationally explain it, but the thought of someone trying to hurt him, to violently destroy him, filled me with a powerful, primal rage. "My second in command, a man named Silas," Rhys said, his voice flat with a deep, crushing sense of betrayal. "He coveted my position, my power. He believed that if he could utterly break me, the pack would follow him. He used a very rare poison, a toxic blend of wolfsbane and dark magic, a poison that only a true healer, one with the gift of a healer's blood, could possibly cure. My blood. The memory of my grandfather's obscure notes, and the few drops of my own blood I had deliberately mixed with the crushed moon petal came rushing back to me. It all made a terrifying, impossible kind of sense. My supposed gift, the one I had run from, was not merely my advanced medical knowledge. It was something infinitely more profound. It was a tangible, active power to heal the impossible. He must have immediately seen the dawning, terrifying realization on my face. The whispers about you, they reached us. We knew there was a healer out there, one with a touch that could do more than just mend broken bones. We've been searching for you, my pack, and I, for a very long time. They called you the Phantom Healer. A ghost, a mere myth. And you just showed up randomly at my clinic, I asked, the sheer, profound absurdity of the entire situation hitting me. I was running out of time, he said, his eyes darkening with the memory of the sheer agony he had endured. The pain was beyond anything I had ever felt. I was rapidly losing the fight against the curse. I knew I couldn't risk a regular hospital. I had to find you. I had to take the one desperate chance that the stories were true. He stood up slowly, the blanket falling silently to the floor, and walked purposefully toward me. My breath hitched in my throat. He was a magnificent creature, even in his human form, a perfect, seamless blend of raw power and innate grace. He stopped mere inches away from me, and the air around us immediately crackled with a silent, intense energy. The earthy scent of pine and damp moss was still present, but now it was deeply mixed with a purely male, musky scent that sent a powerful jolt of awareness through me. "You saved me, Avery Kincaid," he said, his gaze absolutely unwavering. The sheer intensity of his stare made me feel completely exposed, as if he could see into every hidden part of me. The guilt, the fear, the secret, desperate desire to be something more than just a doctor who made one tragic mistake. You have no conception of what that means to me, to my pack. I opened my mouth, desperate to say something, anything, but no words would come out. My throat was tight, my mind a chaotic race. I had fled from one profound danger, only to fall headfirst into another. I had tried so hard to live a simple, safe life, and now I was standing in a clinic in the middle of a major city with a werewolf alpha, a man I had just miraculously saved from a magical curse. What happens now? I asked the question, a barely audible whisper. He reached out slowly and gently cupped my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin lightly. His touch was warm and incredibly strong, sending a powerful jolt of pure sensation through me. "Now I heal," he said, his gaze utterly unwavering. "And now you are part of my pack, my life, my responsibility." The words were not a subtle threat, but a profound, unshakable promise. He had unequivocally claimed me. And as I looked into his deep eyes, into the very depths of a soul that had just gone through hell and returned, I felt a strange, undeniable sense of belonging. The profound emptiness I had been carrying, the deep isolation I had deliberately sought, began instantly to recede, replaced by a feeling of something solid, something profoundly real. I had found a place where my past didn't matter. Only the present moment, only the healing, and only the beast who was now irrevocably mine. Chapter 5. The morning after Rhys's miraculous healing was a bizarre blur of superficial normality and quiet, underlying tension. While the rest of the city awoke to the usual chaotic rhythm of morning traffic and brewing coffee, I was completely trapped in my clinic with a werewolf alpha who now considered me a permanent member of his pack. He was a man of very few words, but his presence was a constant, powerful, overwhelming force. I had never felt so utterly seen, and simultaneously so completely out of my depth. "We need to leave," he said, breaking the long silence as he stood by the window, his gaze rigidly fixed on the quiet street below. The morning sun illuminated the lean, impressive muscles of his back, and I had to forcefully prevent myself from staring openly. He had somehow managed to find a spare set of scrubs, a size too tight and slightly too short, but even in the absurd uniform of a medical professional, he radiated a powerful, wild, untamed energy. "Leave where?" I asked, my heart hammering loudly against my ribs. The mere thought of uprooting my entire life again, especially after I had just desperately attempted to settle down, was terrifying. I had run so far only to find myself in a new kind of prison, one with a very handsome, very dangerous captor. "My territory," he said, turning sharply to face me. His eyes were a deep, serious brown, holding an unwavering, unyielding resolve. "You are in significant danger here. Silas knows I am alive. He knows I possess a healer. He will not stop until he finds you and eliminates you." The word eliminates hung menacingly in the air, a chilling, stark reminder that this wasn't a whimsical fairy tale. It was a brutal world of violent power struggles and ancient, deadly magic. My past had been a prison of self-inflicted guilt. This was a new prison of mandatory survival. "I can't just abandon my life," I argued, my voice tight with frustration. "My clinic, my apartment, my patients." He walked purposefully toward me, his steps silent and predatory. He stopped just inches away, and I had to physically tilt my head back to meet his compelling gaze. "Your patients will find another doctor. Your apartment will be rented by someone else. But you have only one life, and right now, that life is inextricably tied to mine." He wasn't bluffing. I saw it in his eyes, a grim, battle-worn, absolute knowledge that chilled me to the core. The simple life I had craved was now an impossible, dangerous luxury. My past had been a tragic mistake, a devastating accident. This was a direct, calculated threat, a conscious choice to enter a world I could not possibly comprehend. "I need to pack," I said, the words of complete surrender. He nodded slowly, a hint of something that looked like powerful approval in his gaze. "I'll come with you. We cannot risk you being alone, not for a moment." The drive to my apartment was almost completely silent, filled instead with an intense, unspoken understanding. The city, which had once been my absolute refuge, now felt like a dangerous, exposed cage. Every passing car, every person on the street, felt like a potential threat. I couldn't shake the unnerving feeling that we were being closely watched. Once inside my small apartment, I moved with a frantic, desperate urgency. I threw clothes, beloved books, and a few essential personal mementos into a battered suitcase. Rhys watched me silently from the doorway, his immense presence a heavy, strangely comforting weight. He saw me, truly saw me, not just as a doctor, but as a terrified woman. He saw my fear, and he saw my rising resolve. When I was finished, I took one last look around the apartment that had briefly been my sanctuary. It felt foreign now, a place I had only tentatively inhabited before my real life, my new, impossible life, began. I grabbed a small, framed photo of my parents, their cheerful smiles a testament to a life I could no longer live. I clutched it tightly to my chest, a small, fragile anchor in the oncoming storm. "Ready?" Rhys asked, his voice softer than before. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. As we walked out the front door, a sudden, furtive movement in the deep shadows across the street instantly caught my eye. A man tall and thin with cold, calculating eyes. Silas. A jolt of pure, raw adrenaline shot through me. He was watching us. I froze instantly, and Rhys's hand immediately clamped down on my arm, his touch hard as solid stone. He pulled me close, his massive body instinctively shielding me from view. "He's here," he rumbled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape its cage. This was no longer a medical emergency. This was a clear, unambiguous life-or-death situation. Rhys wasted absolutely no time. He half-dragged, half-carried me to the truck he had parked a block away. His movements were swift and utterly silent, like a shadow moving across the pavement. He threw me inside the passenger seat and slid instantly behind the wheel, the engine roaring violently to life with a ferocious growl that seemed to perfectly echo the beast I had met. As we sped violently away, I looked desperately in the rearview mirror, my eyes locked on the precise spot where Silas had stood. He was gone, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was only the beginning. I had saved the beast, and now, in turn, he was saving me. My new life had just commenced, and it was a terrifying, exhilarating, and completely unknown adventure. I had traded the quiet solitude of a city doctor for a life on the run with a werewolf alpha. And I knew without a shadow of a doubt that my past, my single tragic mistake, had inevitably led me to this single, pivotal moment. I was no longer a passive victim of circumstance, but an active participant in a much larger, infinitely more dangerous story. And I had a powerful feeling that the monster with a heart was my only hope for true survival. Chapter 6. The truck, a sturdy, heavily worn vehicle that felt as powerful and untamed as the man driving it, devoured the miles rapidly. As we left the urban sprawl behind, the dense cityscape quickly gave way to the rolling hills and towering, ancient forests of the Pacific Northwest. Rhys drove with a silent, focused intensity, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. I sat rigidly beside him, watching the familiar world disappear in the rearview mirror, replaced by an unfamiliar wilderness that felt both immensely beautiful and profoundly menacing. We drove for what felt like endless hours, the moon now a brilliant, massive orb, casting a haunting, silvery sheen over the entire landscape. I was utterly exhausted, my body aching from the night before, my mind a jumbled, chaotic mess of lingering fear and disbelief. I had to consciously force myself to accept that the man sitting beside me was a werewolf, that I somehow possessed a genuine gift for magical healing, and that my life was now inextricably and permanently linked to a hidden, ancient world I had never even dared to dream existed. Finally, we turned sharply off the main highway onto a long, winding dirt road, completely hidden from view by a thick canopy of trees. The air grew noticeably colder, and a familiar scent, that complex mix of pine, earth, and something undeniably wild, grew exponentially stronger. After what felt like an eternity, we came to a large, unexpected clearing. In the center stood a rustic, yet beautiful lodge, constructed from dark wood and riverstone. It was a magnificent structure, blending in so perfectly with the surrounding ancient forest that it was almost completely invisible. This was his home, his lair. Rhys cut the engine, and the sudden, profound silence was deafening. He turned slowly to me, his face illuminated by the soft, pale glow of the moon. "Welcome to Black River," he said, his voice low and solemn. "My home, my pack's home." As he spoke, a dozen or so shadowy figures emerged slowly from the darkness of the surrounding trees, their eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. They were a diverse mix of men and women, all of them radiating a quiet, watchful, immense power. They were his pack. My mind reeled again. They were all werewolves. They were all exactly like him. He stepped out of the truck, and they greeted him with quiet, powerful reverence. A few of them clasped his arm in a clear show of absolute loyalty and respect. He was their alpha, their undisputed leader. Their sheer, profound relief at seeing him alive and completely whole was palpable, a visible wave of emotion. "This is Avery," he announced, his voice carrying an authority I had never before heard. He looked directly at me, and his eyes held a possessive, deep warmth that made my breath catch in my throat. "She is the one who healed me, the phantom healer." A murmur of awe and intense curiosity went through the assembled crowd. They looked at me not with fear or suspicion, but with a kind of reverent, profound gratitude. I was the one who had saved their alpha. I was the one who had brought him back from the absolute brink of death. A tall, graceful woman with striking blonde hair stepped forward first. "My name is Lee," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Thank you for saving our alpha." Her eyes, though kind, held a deep, ancient wisdom. I could only manage a simple nod, completely unable to find my voice. I was still desperately trying to wrap my rational head around the fact that I was standing in a forest clearing, surrounded by a dozen or more werewolves. Rhys placed a gentle but firm hand on the small of my back, guiding me toward the lodge's entrance. "We need to get you inside. You're exhausted." As we entered, the interior was a complete surprise. It was warm and incredibly welcoming, filled with the comforting scent of wood smoke and a lingering, spicy aroma of cooked food. A large stone fireplace crackled cheerfully in the main living area, and plush, comfortable, oversized couches were scattered throughout the room. It felt like a home, not a hidden, dangerous lair. Rhys led me to a simple but cozy room with a large, comfortable bed and a window that looked out directly onto the thick forest. "You can rest here," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "No one will bother you, you're safe here." The word safe was a strange, powerful comfort. I had been running for so long, trying desperately to find a place of genuine safety. Only now did I realize that true safety wasn't a place at all. It was a person. The man who had taken me captive, the beast I had healed, was now my powerful protector. "What about Sela's?" I asked, the name a cold hiss on my tongue. Rhys's jaw tightened instantly. "He won't find you here. This is my territory, my pack. He won't get past us." He paused, his gaze fixed intensely on mine. "You are under my protection now, Avery. I will not let anything happen to you." His words were a solid promise, a powerful vow that sent a deep shiver of warmth through me. I was no longer running. I was no longer alone. My past, the tragic mistake that had haunted me relentlessly, had ultimately led me to this impossible, terrifying, and utterly compelling new life. I had been a healer who had failed spectacularly. But now I had a new purpose, a new life, a new kind of found family. And as I looked at the man who was both a fearsome beast and a devoted protector, I realized that I had found a home in the most unlikely of places, with the most impossible of people. I was no longer just a doctor. I was a part of something infinitely more, something ancient and powerfully real. I was the healer, and I had a feeling that the true story of the beast and the healer had only just begun. As I watched him walk away, his massive form disappearing into the darkness of the lodge's interior, the hospital, the city, my old life, it all felt like a distant, fading memory, a past I had willingly traded for a future filled with impossible truths. I had saved the beast, but in doing so, I had lost myself. Or maybe, for the very first time, I was finally found. But a new, terrifying threat now loomed. The peace of the Black River pack was an illusion, a fragile truce that Sela's, the betrayed second-in-command, was determined to shatter. He knew I existed. He knew I was the key to his alpha's survival, and he wouldn't rest until he found me. I was no longer running from a mistake. I was now fighting for my survival. The man who was once my dangerous captor was now my sworn protector. Our forced proximity had awakened something deep and undeniable between us. A powerful bond that was far deeper than mere words. A connection forged in the fires of a magical curse and a desperate life-or-death decision. I was the phantom healer, and he was my alpha. Our story had just begun. Will Avery and Rhys's fragile, powerful bond survive the looming threat of Sela's and his dark magic? What ancient secrets does the Black River pack hold? And what is the true, ultimate nature of Avery's mysterious healing gift? Don't miss a single moment of this epic paranormal romance fantasy. Part 2 of The Healer and the Beast is coming soon. Subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of their journey.